Before we move away from our create track component to fill out other components within our app, let's do two things. First of all, let's clear out any state that we have stored within our create track dialog. Notice that we still have the audio file stored here from the track that we just added. We want to clear that out so users are easily able to create additional tracks with different information. The next thing is that we also want to create a file limit because we don't want to upload audio files that are incredibly big. Remember that we have a limited amount of space with Cloudinary. I believe that the free tier gives you about 1 gigabyte of storage, so we want to limit the file size that users are allowed to add and upload. So let's take care of clearing out our form once a new track has been successfully added. So at the moment, for each of our inputs or text fields, we're taking the value provided to them and putting them in their corresponding state value. The only problem is when we set these values back to their initial value of an empty string, our form is still not going to be cleared out. And that's because we have what's known as an uncontrolled component. We're setting state from each of the inputs, but these inputs aren't reading from state. As the name implies, the values that are within these inputs aren't being controlled by anything. So we want to make them controlled by state so that when we set them to their initial value, the value that they contain is cleared out as well. So to accomplish this, for each of our text fields, we need to add the value prop and set it to the state value that it corresponds to. So for the title text field, its value prop should be set to the title value in state. For the description text field, its value is going to be determined by the current value of description in state. And finally, note that file inputs are always uncontrolled inputs because their value can only be set by a user and not programmatically. So now to clear out our form, we can head to either handle submit after we execute create track, or we can head to on completed after set open to set all of our state values back to their initial value of an empty string. So we'll call set title, pass in an empty string, and do the same for set description and set file. So now let's save create track. We'll try adding a new track. Let me just refresh. This will be test 3 description, and we'll add some audio file. And once that's added, let's take a look at our dialog again, and we can see all of the values within the form have been cleared out. Now let's take care of rejecting audio files that are greater than our stated file limit. So in my case, I want to reject files that are greater than 10 megabytes. So currently I have this 200 megabyte MP3 file, and at the moment, if I select it, it's accepted as a perfectly valid track. Instead of this behavior, I want the ability to throw an error and display an error message right underneath the audio file input instead of accepting that file that's too large. So remember that for our file input, its onChange is set to a function handle audio change. So when we head up to handle audio change, we can add some additional logic to check to see if the selected file is greater than or less than our stated file limit. So first of all, let's put our file size limit in a variable of the same name. As I mentioned, mine was going to be 10 megabytes, and in individual bytes, that's 10 million, so 1 with 7 zeros. So within handle audio change, we want to see if we have a selected file and check to see that the selected file size, and we can get the selected file size from selected file.size. We want to see if the selected file size is greater than our file size limit. If that's the case, then we want to display an error message. And for this error message, we'll create a new piece of state and we'll call this our file error. The setter will be set file error, and by default it's going to be set to an empty string. So if the file is too large, we will execute set file error and pass in a message with the interpolated file name, and that's going to come from selected file dot name, and we're going to say that this file size is too large. Otherwise, else, we're going to set the file in state just like we were doing previously, and we're going to clear the file error. So here we're going to set file error back to an empty string. Then to display our error message that we're storing in state, let's head down to our input, and we're surrounding the input with a form control, and form control takes a prop called error, where if we set this value to true, then it's going to display for us a message which is provided within a form helper text component. So within this form helper text component, and we're going to put this right before our closing label tag, we're going to interpolate the file error text that we have stored in state. And we're going to conditionally show this form helper text based on whether we have some error text in our file error value. So to set error to true and display it, we can directly pass in file error. So if we have some text on it, it's going to be converted to a Boolean that is true. Otherwise, if it's an empty string, it's going to be treated as a falsy value and be converted to false. Now we're going to get a warning message from form control if we don't first convert this to a Boolean. So we can use the Boolean function or constructor to manually convert it ourselves. Now let's save create track and test this out. We'll try adding a file that's too large. So I'll select this one that's 200 megabytes. And we get our error message saying that the following file with this name is too large. Now if we upload a file that's within our 10 megabyte limit, it's accepted. And the last thing we can take care of is telling our users about this 10 megabyte limit within this subtitle. So after the text audio file, let's say in parentheses under 10 megabytes.